It's so important in the African American community because so many of people in the community and our ancestors, Astor, felt like therapy wasn't for us.
Hmm.
And you can go back to the 400 years ago in the days of slavery. There was a term called drapetomania, where if one of the slaves got caught trying to flee and they got caught and the master brought them back, they would deem them mentally ill and say they had something called drapetomania. And so the slaves would never express, obviously, if anything was wrong or if they were having a bad day, because nobody cared about that anyway, but they would just deem them mentally ill anyway. So help and health and wellness wasn't for us anyway.
Right.
The white
Right.
people was for the master. And so I think a lot of that still trickles down into our communities, right? And into the culture. And we find now that yes, people are starting to open up, but so many people are still suffering in our culture
Hmm.
in silence. I don't have the exact statistics right here in front of me, but I do know that suicide is either the second or third leading cause of death for young adults in the Black community. We see the rise of violence in our communities, and I'm absolutely not blaming mental health on all the rise in violence, but I do also think that our kids, our babies, our young adults, they don't have healthy ways to cope. A lot of times when you see in schools when they say kids are acting out or they're just bad,
Hmm.
9 times out of 10, it's something going on from a health and wellness perspective, right? They
Right.
could have experienced trauma in the home from seeing a family member get shot or get
Yep.
killed, or, domestic violence, or, child molestation, anything. And all of that trauma can build up. And over time, with that unresolved trauma and undiagnosed trauma, it can lead to other mental illnesses and physical health illnesses. So we just see a lot of that in our communities. And even for our artists, like, look at the number of artists that we've seen that have, either taken their own lives or, suffer with substance abuse issues,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
substance abuse is separate than mental health, but it goes hand in hand. They're like
Yep.
cousins, right?
Yep.
So if you're dealing with a mental health challenge, oftentimes you might turn to, what do they call it? Lean, or, all of the
Yeah. Yeah.
things from a substance abuse perspective, or even weed and marijuana sometimes can be addictive, and it can have an adverse effect on one's mental health and wellness. And so we see a lot of
Hmm.
our artists still kind of perpetuating those vibes and that energy. But 9 times out of 10, they're using that stuff a lot of times because they don't feel like coping. They don't
They
want
can't
to
cope.
deal.
Mm.
They can't cope. They don't want to deal, right? They get depressed and they're like, okay, let me just go get high, or let me just go this,
Hmm.
go do this. But the thing about it, and I'm not the social police, but what happens is if you're just putting a band-aid over that problem and
You're not solving.
you're not solving it. And so that's why we see, these traumatic events, if you will, acting out on social media or playing out in front of our eyes with a lot of the artists or even actors and athletes that we love, because they're not getting the help, or their entourage is yet all yes people. They're too afraid to talk to anyone. And so that's why, I'm fighting and we're fighting at Silence the Shame so hard to continue to break down these walls of stigma so that people can get the help that they need. I have a friend who's at a record company, and now, okay, we're in 2022, kind of post pandemic. A lot of record companies now have, really great employee assistance programs. They have mental health support. They have direct services. But I know people who work at the label, some of them are like, yeah, I got that. I went once. It really wasn't for me. Or I didn't like the lady, so I stopped going and I deleted all those.
Hmm.
But you need the help. You just told me like you kind of need the help. And so I still feel like there's so much education that still needs to happen. So even though we're talking about it, it doesn't mean people are actually getting the help that they need. And
Right.
I think we're going back to pre-pandemic levels of workload, stress, travel. Everybody's back outside,
Yep.
all the events
Yep.
are happening. You see somebody, it's like kind of going back to the fake shit.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like, oh,
Yep.
hey, what's up? You good? Yeah, yeah, I'm great. Woo, woo, woo. But are you really great? Like,
Right.
it's almost like we had this moment, but I just don't want to lose that moment.
That's right.
Because I feel like the anxiety is still there. People are still dealing with it, but they're not really being true to themselves. Like, okay, I don't really have to deal with that now that things are back open. Maybe if I just get moving again and kind of ignore it and act like it's not happening, then that's not the case. And I coined this phrase for rap, for RAP. So wrapping through your problems from a mental health perspective, first you have to be able to recognize what's going on. If some shit is funny and you don't understand why you acted out or something happened, you got to say, okay, let me recognize the fact that I did something that was uncharacteristic of myself, right?
Mm,
So then you acknowledge that it happened, and once you accept it, you can actually process through it with a professional. So RAP, being able
mm.
to recognize, acknowledge, accept, and but process it through with a professional, right? You got
I
to
love
talk to
that.
somebody, you got to go to the doctor, you got to be able to tell your primary healthcare physician or somebody that something is going on. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see people, overdosing, acting out, the irritability. We see it all the time with artists. I can just remember back on some of the artists that I worked with, and I was thinking, oh, what is wrong with them? They just crazy. And I hate to even use that C word, but
Yeah.
they,
Yep.
they were dealing with, unresolved issues of trauma or anxiety and things that they were afraid to tackle.